All right, so the first topic today is the topic of sun exposure. And if you follow me on Facebook or Instagram, you've seen this. You saw this over the weekend when I posted it, but I just wanted to cover it here as well so that YouTube and any other platforms that I'm on can also get this information. And this information is regarding the sun and the debate of whether the sun is good for you or bad for you. Does the sun cause skin cancer? This is a debate that's ongoing, and my personal stance is that I believe the sun is good for you. It's not the sun that causes cancer, it is sunburns that cause cancer. And this research would support that stance. And in this paper, in the Journal of Photochemistry and Photobiology, titled Infrared in the Skin, Friend or Foe, the authors wanted to look at just that question, is how does sun exposure, specifically the infrared spectrum from the sun, affect skin? And what you'll see here in the abstract is that the authors say infrared A radiation from the sun might precondition the skin, a process called photoprevention. From an evolutionary standpoint, since exposure to early morning infrared wavelengths in sunlight may ready the skin for the coming midday damaging UV rays. Consequently, infrared appears to be the solution, not the problem. It does more good than bad for the skin. It is essentially a question of intensity and how we can learn from the sun. And so if we go down, there's a bunch of interesting charts in this paper. And here real quick is the light spectrum. And you might remember from high school biology class or high school science class that we see in the visible light, Roy G. Biv, the colors of the rainbow. And on the blue end is ultraviolet, and ultraviolet can cause cancer. And on the red end, there's infrared, which we can't, there's near infrared all the way into far infrared. And so these authors are investigating the infrared wavelength to see, is it good or bad? And they end up saying it's good, because the take home from the paper is that the early morning sun preconditions the skin or prepares the skin for noonday exposure, which can be damaging. And then afternoon evening sun repairs the skin from whatever the noonday sun was doing to damage it. And so there's lots of interesting charts in this table, or in this paper, talking about it. But one to really zoom in on here is this one. Okay, so you can see on the left a person's arm, I believe. And what they did is they had the control on the far right of the image, viewer's right, and then they exposed the skin to different wavelengths of light, and then saw how much burn. They pre-exposed the skin to different wavelengths of light, and then observed for burn after noonday exposure. And so they used visible light all the way to near infrared, and you can see the near infrared exposure prepared the skin, or the skin burned the least amount when they were pre-exposed or did preconditioning or photoprevention with near infrared light. So they used near infrared light wavelengths, which we can use with lasers. That's laser treatment basically, but that's laser treatment is in the place of, or representational of, the early morning sun and then the later evening sun. So if you have that early morning sun, or you go lay in a near infrared LED light booth, kind of like a tanning bed type of thing, before you went out on the beach, then you're promoting protection and decreased burns from that midday ultraviolet radiation that you'll be getting. So that was very interesting. And the real take home here in this picture is that if you can, the take home here is, here's the angle of the sun and your shadow, right? So in the morning, you have a long shadow. At noon, you have almost no shadow because the sun's right overhead. And then in the evening, you have a long shadow again. So these authors said that basically one easy rule of thumb is if your shadow is taller than you, then that sun exposure is healthy and safe and preventative or repairing. If your shadow is shorter than you, then that sun is more damaging. Okay, so we want to get the preventative and repair sunlight. We don't want to be out in the damaging sun. So, you know, sunburns and managing the sun properly, there's many factors involved. You know, your total inflammatory level, your diet, your vitamin D level, you know, there's all kinds of things that matter. But in regards to the sun itself being the only factor, the early morning and later evening sun is protective. The midday sun is potentially dangerous. So you want to be smart. You want to give yourself the healthy sun pre and post. And when you're in the midday times, you want to limit exposure. So you don't want to be out in it for that whole time that it's out without, you know, taking micro breaks, going inside, getting in the shade. You know, don't stay out in it unbroken and get baked that whole time. So really interesting study. And so they close with this. One could therefore assume that early morning sun salutation and late afternoon procrastination on the beach are actually natural laser treatments to prevent and repair, respectively. Consequently, if your shadow is taller than you are in the early morning and late afternoon, you're taking advantage of the beneficial effects of infrared while avoiding peak harmful ultraviolet rays. Ultimately, it is another way of being sun smart. So again, if your shadow is taller than you, you're good. If your shadow is shorter than you, then you need to be smart about the exposure and preventing burns.